So, how do you make a game like Grow a Garden on Roblox? And one of the reasons for its gigantic success might actually be its numerous social and competitive features, and I always wondered why they never added a proper leaderboard system, like those you can see relatively frequently nowadays. But this is how you can create either one of those systems. So once you press tab in Roblox Studio, you can see this gray player list panel popping up, and it essentially comes with a built-in comparison feature. So we can add whatever values we like. Also define the order, have the players sorted automatically, which is quite simple to do, although it isn't quite, glorious, and also won't show past players. But in order to add new values now, we have to make sure to add a folder below our player objects, which we need to do as soon as they join. Like so, this is just an example now. You need to have the name Leaderstats, and then we can add all sorts of int values, for instance, to it, which will be then considered for comparison. And of course, if you've been following the series, you can also just move this one and update the respective lines in your code. If you don't, you can just add a new script to service, since it needs to happen on the server. Call it whatever you like. And now this is essentially the way we can get notified over new players joining. And I'll just edit print now for testing. And there you can see our empty message being printed correctly into the console from the server. So the very thing I just did manually, like adding this folder and the int value to it, we now need to do here. For instance, like so. So create the thing, rename it, and put it right below here inside our hierarchy. But make sure to name it exactly this way since it's case sensitive. And this is essentially the same thing, just with an int value. You can also set the parent like so, but I think I wanted to keep it in a single line for now, for readability's sake. Let's give it a try. So this is looking just, gorgeous now, because it tells us it should have worked. But just to make sure, we got this Leaderstats folder now, and the balance right inside it, or as a child. And now inside your game, you can use this variable to override value in order to store your player's balance, like increment it whenever selling a harvest and so on. But in case you already have a separate system for that, like I do, as you can see, I use this int value directly below the player. You can also just kind of connect the two, so whenever this one changes, the one used by my systems, we want to update this one as well. So we need to get access to this one, which is sitting directly inside or below the player. So inside our script, for instance, we get access to it. I use wait for child here in order to make up for delays in case the respective script creating this value needs slightly longer than this one. And this is how we can connect your code to it. That is being run whenever this value attribute changes, so this is why it says value here. I know it might be a bit odd if this says in value 2, but this is essentially just the holder. Anyway, this is how you can do it, so let's have a look. So it says 0 at the start because my player's balance didn't change yet. Let's see what happens as soon as I increment the value, like by setting this caret. It says 2 here. There's our message, meaning we were notified about the difference correctly. So we can just set the leaderboard in values value to the one used by our other systems. And again, it says .value here because we need to change this one. So 0 to my name, 0 inside the leader stats. And now both of those say 2. You can also do some multiplayer testing by changing this to server and clients and set the player amount to 2, for instance. So now the one on the left should be player 2. So let's keep track of its position inside Leaderstats. So once the balance changes to 2, the order gets updated correctly. Awesome. And by the way, in case this panel doesn't show up, even though you press tab, one of your scripts, and this includes any scripts you might find attached to toolbox assets you use, might include a similar code snippet like this one from my entire Grow a Garden framework, but then it likely says player list or something along those lines, instead of reset button callback, as the respawn button is supposed to refer to this one down here. But now how do we add a proper, or I guess spatial one, like this one here, which you can also find somewhere isolated, somewhere below my profile. But for simplicity's sake, let's have a look at persistent storage, so being able to display past players as well at another time. So for instance, to create one similar to the one I was just showing, we can insert a part like this, preferably parented somewhere close to workspace. Make sure it is anchored, so the player can knock it over. If you like, you can also rename it. And then we probably want to scale this by hitting 3 on the keyboard. And then, for instance, doing it like so. Maybe make it slightly transparent, which you can do here, and black or whatever color you prefer. If you change this to test here again, you can also inspect its relative size, like relative to the player character. So let's assume I like this one, I'm not sure if I do. We only need to get a UI, so user interface, projected onto its front face, whatever one it may be, as opposed to, the entire screen, like we did with the player balance in the last episode. You can probably find somewhere sitting, here at the top right, or rather up here or whatever. So whenever we want to listen to input, we need to make sure to add GUIs to this folder, or player GUI at runtime. But since this time we don't, unless you want to have some sort of categories or so, we can also add it directly below workspace. So let's go with a surface GUI, rename it to, for instance, leaderboard GUI. You just need to make sure to use the correct name inside the code in a minute. Set its authority to leaderboard, like main object, and you can already see this blue rectangle highlighting the, from our perspective, perhaps the left face. So let's change this by setting this to, I don't know, can either be left or right, I guess, perhaps left. Yeah, there you go. Let me come a bit closer, in case it's easier to tell, like so. So you can add a frame to it in case you want to limit the GUI size. You can also, for instance, add a scroll or scrolling frame to it and max out its size by replacing this with just 1. So 100%, since those former values refer to the relative size. You can already see it working, although, I'm also changing the camera at the same time. You likely want to make it transparent too, and this will essentially serve as the holder or container for those single player panels we add at runtime for each player. For instance, we could represent those as a frame with various text labels or icons or so subordinate. We can also, so you can get the idea a little more easily, just add a text label, change its relative size to 1 again, and whether you want to use a relative or absolute size on the Y is kind of up for debate, but let's change the relative one to, for instance, 0.1 or... Oh, and the reason why we can see it is because of this scroll setting. There you go. So the disadvantage of this relative approach being whenever you change the scroll frames, I think scroll height is called, you need to make sure to essentially make up for it right in here. So now you can kind of fashion yourself the visual style you like the most. For instance, give it a placeholder text. We're going to change it in a minute anyway, like at runtime. Player, you probably don't want these killed automatically, but use a fixed size instead, so it doesn't look all messed up in case one player's got a longer name than another. Like you can change the text color to white, make the background transparent, make it bold or whatever, or you can do it the way I did in my Grow Garden framework and also in this modular thing. Have a frame with various columns, if you will, to it, or create a separate template for the first place, second, and so on. But of course you can also add the score or balance or whatever in here right away, like using whatever separator, for instance just a blank. But now as you can see, even though we duplicate those, like we would more or less do at runtime, they still don't align correctly. But no worries, there's a built-in component for that called UI list layout. So essentially a grid layout with the amount of columns being equal to 1. And now we need to store our template somewhere. So for instance, inside replicated storage, like I do in my framework, or parent it here to this list layout, and perhaps rename it. And this is all we need to do in Studio, unless you count its, integrated code editor. So now for instance, let's use a new script for that. You can call it Leaderboard, for example. And now we need a way to find out what players are currently sitting, or rather playing, on our server instance. So this is what this code can be used for. Just printing the player's name now for testing it. Or leave it out rather. Not working so far. Let's figure out why. Alright, this code just executes before the player actually joined. But this shouldn't bother us for now because we need to update the leaderboard on a regular basis anyway, which we can do like this, for instance every 10 seconds. Put this inside here now. You can also briefly wait at the very start, but now make sure not to add any code below here, since this will run infinitely, unless you want to encapsulate like this, because then it's run in parallel. Let's check it out. There you go. So list of all of my players, but now instead of printing their name, we need to get access to the template, duplicate it, and change its text, and reparent it to the scrolling frame, like this, but make sure to use like to stick to your hierarchy when it comes to the structure, but also when it comes to the names. Otherwise, in case you also use wait for child, you're gonna see a yellow message saying, I don't know, it runs infinitely because it wasn't found. So clone the template and then reparent it to the scrolling frame using this line. I think I also want to change this to 5 for testing. There you go. But now if we were to wait another 10 seconds, whatever interval you used, you can find the same player being added, although it's just one player on the server, which is because we don't clean up the old entries. So before adding new ones like so, preferably in here, we also need to make sure to go over the existing children and remove all of them, aside from the UI list layout, like so. Perform an action for all of its children. In case it's the list layout we encountered, go on to evaluate the next one right away, meaning this won't be executed, but in case it isn't a UI list layout, we destroy it. So first entry, and now it appears to remain at 1, although, you know, after editing the video it might just be 5 seconds for you or so. Now let's change its text, and since in my case the entry is a text label itself, rather than a frame having a text label as a child, I can access the name text, the text attribute, and then we can set it like this or whatever you like. Player's name, concatenated with a blank, and also the balance, you know, the one sitting right inside the player as opposed to the Leaderstats one, and make sure to access its value, because this being still just being the parent. So for now it still says 0, but this time around using the correct player name. But now after changing the value and briefly waiting, we can see the 0 changing to 2 now. And by the way, in case you would like to rather use your player's display name, in case it differs from the internal one, you can do it like so. You know, some of your players might prefer it since it looks cleaner and it's the one you can actually change. So this is my future version speaking. If we just do it like this and iterate over the players in their default order, it won't be sorted. As we can see here, whenever I increase player 2's balance, check out the server, with a bit of patience of course. There you go, not sorted yet. So instead of iterating over it directly, we need to temporarily sort the list here, sort it like so, where we can just use this beautiful standard function, where true means the left object is greater than the right one. So in our case we again use this balance int value directly below the player. You can also go with the one from Leaderstats or whatever. In case A's balance, but value again, is greater than B's, this automatically returns true, meaning the left object is greater than the right, and this function essentially applies this to all of those pairs, making sure it is actually, it ends up sorted. And then we plug it in here, where we previously had this original players list. What does it look like now? So I want to do this with player 2 again, since it's the one showing up at the bottom by default. There we go, great. And with that, back to past Jaden, and make sure not to forget to drink your coffee so it doesn't get cold again. Yeah, and those are the 2 ways you can essentially set up a simple leaderboard inside your Grow Garden-like game. So glad this video will finally be slightly shorter than the previous one. But now what could we add next time, like in the next episode? Perhaps, oh, what have we got here? Perhaps daily rewards or regular events, like those lunar events, like with this framework you can find in the description. Let's see what happens. There you go, so whenever I make a harvest now, you can see this example currency increasing. Oh, and don't mind this texture issue, that's just a studio thing at times. Anyway, please feel free to reach out if you have any questions, and talk soon whenever, I don't know, the stars align, like this for example.